Welcome to the Little Sparks Podcast, your home for all things faith and music. I'm Cecilia.
And I'm Tara.
And we're former college roommates, professional musicians, and co-founders of the Hildegard Collective, a space for Catholic musicians to connect with one another and grow in their faith and profession. This podcast is an outreach of the collective, so if you're interested at all in Catholicism, music, or both, this is the podcast for you. Join us each week as we get real, share stories, and learn from other awesome Catholic musicians. We're all little sparks of God's divine creation, so together, let's ignite the world for Christ.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Little Sparks Podcast. This is our first episode in Advent, which is super exciting. Happy Liturgical New Year, everyone.
Yes. Happy Liturgical New Year. This is exciting.
Yes. And today we are going to be talking about a super interesting Christmas carol that some of our listeners may be familiar with or may be new to some people. And that is the hymn, the Huron Carol. If anybody's
This is new to me. This is like super new to me. So I'm really interested to discuss this.
Yeah. So if we have any Canadian listeners, you probably know this song. This is a Canadian hymn originally. And the reason that we decided to do this episode today was because this piece is in my Christmas repertoire this year. And as I was rehearsing this piece and singing through it and memorizing it, there was a particular word in the lyrics that really piqued my interest. And I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it was referring to. And when I went in to research it so that I could understand the context of the piece better, this whole fascinating history of this piece opened up to me. It was really cool. And I think there's actually a lot we can learn from this piece in regards to evangelization and how we evangelize to people. So we are going to touch on all of that today, but I wanted to start off by just reading you the lyrics of this piece. And I bet that the same word that stuck out to me will also stick out to you because it's very unusual. And we'll talk through it from there. So there are 4 verses in this piece, in this hymn, and it is originally not in English. So this is a translation. So if anybody has sung this before, don't know if you've sung this particular translation or a different translation, but this is the one we're going to read today. So these are the words. 'Twas in the moon of winter time, when all the birds had fled, that mighty Gitchy Manitou sent angel choirs instead. Before their light the stars grew dim, and wandering hunters heard the hymn, Jesus your King is born, Jesus is born in excelsis gloria. Within a lodge of broken bark the tender babe was found, a ragged robe of rabbit skin enwrapped his beauty round. But as the hunter braves drew nigh, the angel song rang loud and high, Jesus your King is born, Jesus is born in excelsis gloria. The earliest moon of winter time is not so round and fair as was the ring of glory on the helpless infant there. The chiefs from far before him knelt, with gifts of fox and beaver pelt. Jesus your King is born, Jesus is born in excelsis gloria. O children of the forest free, O sons of Manitou, the holy child of earth and heaven is born today for you. Come kneel before the radiant boy who brings you beauty, peace, and joy. Jesus your King is born, Jesus is born in excelsis gloria. So those are the words.
That is a really lovely carol.
It is. Did anything stick out to you about this piece, Cecilia?
Yeah,
having heard it for the first time?
The word Manitou, what is that?
Yes, so I have heard this word before, Manitou, right? I'm familiar. There's a group called the Manitou Singers. They have a recording that I really like that I've listened to for years. So I'd heard this word Manitou before, and I saw it in this piece, and I was like, what is that? What does that mean? In the context of this piece, it sounds like it's referring to God, right? And I brought it up to Dan, to my husband, and he's very well read in theology and stuff. And I was like, what does Manitou mean? And he was like, I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is. Okay. I thought it would be like a theological concept or something. So this was what got me started on this whole rabbit hole. So Manitou, or at the beginning of the piece, it's referred to as Gitchy Manitou, is the Huron people's native Canadian word for their concept of God.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this piece was actually written by a saint, which I did not know. And
Whoa.
he's a saint that I'm sure many people are familiar with, Saint John de Brebeuf.
Oh, yeah.
He actually wrote this piece as basically a tool of evangelization and teaching when he was sent on mission to convert the native populations of like Canada and like the northeastern United States. And so basically, St. John de Brebeuf, if anybody is not familiar, was a Jesuit missionary in like the 17th century. And he was sent, along with many others at that time, Jesuits especially, sent to like the native peoples of North America to teach them the gospel. And St. John de Brebeuf had an incredible aptitude for languages. Apparently, he was like not a super academic person generally, but he just like could pick up languages like that. And so, and I imagine as well, just in the cultural and historical context of the time, I mean, going to a native population that had been up to this point mostly uncontacted by like Western peoples, not knowing anything about their language, and there's no structure of like teaching in terms of, you know, they didn't have Duolingo or even like a formalized school system that we know today where like there would have been a native member of that population, you know, ready and able to teach these missionaries the language in terms that they would understand. So he just had to go over and kind of wing it. And apparently he picked up the language so quickly and so thoroughly and so well that he ended up teaching subsequent missionaries who followed him this language. And
I do remember actually learning about that. I took a class in college on American Catholic history, and we touched on some of that, you know, French Canadian mission efforts because they overlap a bit with missionary efforts in, like, say, Michigan or like upstate New York, or, you know, like towards the border of well, the current border of America and Canada. But yeah, I think I might be getting him mixed up with someone else. But I know that there was a Jesuit priest who picked up on the language so quickly, which makes me think it was this one, that they ended up writing a whole catechism in the native language.
It might.
And I don't know if it was Saint Jean de Brebeuf or if it was someone else. But it was like, if it was someone else, it was a similar case where it was like, you know, they were so good at picking up on language that they were actually able to like write an entire like catechetical thing in the native language, which was really, really helpful.
Yeah. It may have been him. I actually don't know that particular instance. But this, I was like, became so fascinated by the history of this piece. So it actually uses a traditional French melody that Saint John knew from his, you know, growing up in France. And he applied these lyrics that he penned in the native language of this people to tell them and teach them the story of the Nativity. And of course, like, I imagine it must be very difficult if you grow up with like an entirely different concept of God and what God is and who God is, how God operates, all of it completely different. It must be really hard to like deconstruct that and reconceptualize it as something totally different. So he kind of met them a little bit in the middle by using terminology and concepts that they were very familiar with because of their way of life and their own indigenous beliefs, and incorporated it in a way that they could really understand this theology and what he was trying to say to them. So, of course, the use of the word Manitou or Gitche Manitou is probably the most obvious example of that. But then, like, if you look through the lyrics as well, it's very nature-based. These populations lived primarily in the forests, and they had a great kind kind of symbiotic relationship with nature that surrounded them. And, you know, in this particular hymn, instead of Jesus being born in a stable, he's born in a lodge of broken bark, right? And he's wrapped in rabbit skin, which I assume is what they probably used in these native populations. And instead of being visited by the magi and the shepherds, he's visited by hunters who are out in the woods and they hear this angel song. And so that's what I think is sort of the brilliance of this hymn, is he was able to so seamlessly take concepts and places and things that this native population was so readily familiar with and just seamlessly weave it together with the theology of the nativity, and to create this not only very effective tool of evangelization, but also just a really beautiful hymn, you know?
Yeah. I love that.
And I think this is something that we can learn a lot from in our modern day and age, because of course now our society is more globalized than ever. There are certainly only a handful of like uncontacted tribes still left in the world. And I think it's easy for us to assume, at least, that most people in the world know of Christianity and know the kind of basic principles and basic tenets of Christianity. And of course, you know, we live in the age of the internet, and we have influencers constantly sharing their thoughts and opinions on things. And evangelization is happening a lot over the internet these days for a lot of people. And this really got me thinking, this hymn, how can we do what St. John de Brebeuf did and really meet people where they're at? Because I think sometimes in our modern thought, there can be a real problem with the idea or the feeling of meeting people where they're at. I think especially there can be a tendency among like certain people and certain groups that our way of thinking and our way of approaching theology and approaching relationship with God and all these concepts is the absolute correct way. And that if somebody wants to learn about Christianity or Catholicism or become Catholic or get baptized or whatever, they have to meet us where we are rather than us reaching out to them. It almost, I get the sense that some people nearly feel degraded, feel like they have to reach down into the dirt and the muck of,
which is so not Christian at all. Again, I totally see what you're saying. And it's very, like, the irony of it is that it really goes against what St. Paul talks about in one of his letters about how, like, you know, I've become all things to all people so that I can bring Christ to all people, you know, which I think is a very, very important aspect of evangelizing that can be easy to forget, especially in the era of armchair theologians and, you know, Twitter debates over, I guess it's X now. I think I'll always call it Twitter, but, you know, debates on X about, you know, the Vatican's recent statement on the use of Mary's titles of co-redemptrix and co-mediatrix. We can't live in these little bubbles of thought, you know, and it's not right to expect people to immerse themselves in these little bubbles of thought when really from the outside it kind of looks almost insane. So like some of these like debates that take place on like X, or like some of the controversies that happen on like Instagram or like whatever, like it actually looks kind of insane from an outsider's perspective. And we have to really be thoughtful, like, is this going to turn someone on towards Christianity or not, you know? Of course, at the same time, we don't want to like go to the way of tolerance and be like, you know, oh, it really doesn't, you know, matter at all what we do or how we phrase things or, you know, whatever. But at the same time, we can't be super rigid in our way of thinking. The Holy Spirit isn't rigid. You know, there's a movement to the Holy Spirit. Like when we talk about the Holy Spirit, it's often in terms of movement, or like I hesitate to use the word fluidity, because I think that term is used a lot in negative ways that can be negative today. But like, I remember hearing a homily once on the Holy Spirit about talking about like the water of life, and how stagnant water just gets really stinky and gross and bacteria filled. Like, there has to be movement in the water. The Holy Spirit brings that movement into the water of life. So like there has to be a level of movement when we evangelize. Like you were saying, we can't just like stay like, this is how we think of things, and so you need to think of them just like we do, or else, you're not going to be a good enough Catholic, or you can't be with us, or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I think there is a healthy way that more people should figure out and learn to balance commitment to the truth and proclamation of the truth, and also loving and reaching the flawed and broken person before you and seeing Christ in them, even if they're not the perfect Catholic. I mean, none of us are. Not a single person. And you could be the most pious, religious, attending 3 masses a day, availing of the sacraments every single day, saying 10 rosaries a day, and having this whole long checklist of devotions. And you could still be struggling with the same thing spiritually as somebody who has only just heard about Jesus and is just beginning to form that relationship. And I think we're so quick to judge people these days. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. And we are so quick to justify our judgment by saying, well, I'm just standing up for the truth. I'm just defending the truth. I'm a Catholic. The truth will set you free. And if you can't accept it and you're not ready to accept it, then that says more about you than it does about me. And too bad, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, there's a tendency towards immaturity in that kind of thinking, and a lack of humility as well. I think that it's really important for us to remember that, humility is an extremely important virtue. I remember reading something once on humility that pointed out that in the Gospels, the one virtue that is always associated with Jesus is humility. Like, he's described as humble. So we're called to follow in his footsteps. We're called to imitate him. That means we have to imitate his humility. So if our lines of thinking are lacking humility, something is wrong there. Something is really wrong.
Yeah.
And I think also, just touching on that, on all of this as well, sometimes I think people look at, the idea of evangelization in general and think that's really hard. And just because it is hard, it might be harder to, get creative and figure out a way to share the faith with the person in front of you that looks different from the way maybe the faith was shared with you. Just because it's harder doesn't mean it's not worth doing. I think that's a symptom of a deeper issue in our culture at large, that, things that are harder aren't necessarily worth doing, when that couldn't be further from the truth. We live in a very low effort culture today, I think. And it's to all of our detriments, honestly. But like, from evangelization efforts to, cultural efforts, like, there's a reason why things are like, we look at culture and we're like, wow, culture is really falling apart at the seams today. And yes, it is a lack of Jesus, but it's also, a lack of mature faith in those of us who profess to believe in him, and a lack of willing to do the harder thing, Absolutely. Even when it's less convenient to us. We have to get rid of our attitudes of convenience over all else, or low effort over all else. I mean, yes, there are some areas in our lives where choosing something more convenient can mean that we actually are freed up to do something that we're called to do that is harder. Like, I don't know, this might be a silly example. When my daughter was born, like, I bought extra clothes and extra washcloths and all this sort of stuff because I didn't want to be doing laundry every day. I wanted to be able to, only do laundry a couple of times a week so that I could actually focus on the baby in front of me and not be super overwhelmed and anxious, So like, there's sometimes we can choose something that's more convenient so we can actually, do like something that's more loving and more difficult maybe in front of us. But we need to not let that attitude of convenience seep into every aspect of our lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Sense? Okay.
Yeah. Like, you should never choose convenience over loving another person.
Yes, exactly.
And if you can like choose a method of convenience in something that allows you to be more present and be more loving, great, happy days, do it. Yeah. But if it's like a choice between your own comfort and your own convenience over the needs of another person, the answer should be pretty obvious.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
And like, tying it back to this carol, it probably was not the easiest thing in the world to sit there and be like, okay, how can I present the story of the birth of Christ to this people in a way that they'll understand it? Like, it took effort, it took creativity, and we have a beautiful carol as a result of this, And
sorry, you want to talk about inconvenient. How do you think all those missionaries felt when they were told that they were going to be sent to basically uncontacted indigenous tribes whose language they did not speak? They didn't know anybody there, spare maybe some of the other missionaries if they were in seminary together or something like that. And they were likely never coming back home. Now, this was in the 17th century, right? There's no postal service in that area at that time, and there is no maps of these areas. They were roughing it when they got sent over. Yeah. Talk about inconvenient. Oh my gosh. I would cry my eyes out if I got.
Oh my gosh, I wouldn't be able to handle it.
If I got an assignment like that, or if God called me to do something like that. And how incredibly humble of them to still accept that calling. Many, many of them were martyred by the indigenous people there. And but ultimately as well, this effort was successful, and they did successfully convert many of the indigenous people and share the message of the gospel that was embraced by a huge part of that population. And so all of that inconvenience was worth it at the end of the day. They knew that they were going in an effort to save their souls and redirect them towards God and towards the truth, and to teach them about Jesus, who loved them enough to die for them on the cross in a country that they've never even heard of. And how beautiful is that? And I think, we admire so many of these saints, and we read about their lives and we hear their stories and we think, wow, how incredible. But when it comes down to our own little inconveniences on the day to day, that we're called to set our own desires and our own comfort aside for the sake of somebody else, do we do it? Are we thinking about these martyrs and these priests in those moments? Probably not.
That's convicting. That's convicting. Yeah, I was just thinking, I want to briefly explore something in relation with the topic of these missionaries, and I guess missionaries in general. I know we hear today a lot of, of the bad stories of, missionary efforts gone wrong, where, horrible things ended up happening and whatnot. And I am wondering now if maybe, just based on our conversation, if maybe some of the reasons some of these things happened was because maybe some of these missionaries that were sent over were not in a place where they were ready to practice heroic love, and they were more thinking of their own interests, or, operating from a capacity of a scarcity mindset. Like, I have such limited resources and I can only do so much. And like, and that ended up having a ripple effect of, negative effects on the people that they were sent to minister to. Whereas then you have with the saints, I mean, because the church, obviously hasn't canonized every single missionary that has ever been sent out. And for a reason, because not all missionaries, displayed heroic love.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are saints displayed heroic love, like Saint John de Brebeuf, his story and the story of the other North American martyrs, like Saint Isaac Jogues, are very difficult to read. I'm not going to lie. I read about in more depth of all of them recently, and it is hard to read their stories, to be honest. But definitely worth reading. But like, these men displayed heroic love. This is the reason they are saints. They chose to do the harder thing and to get creative in how they could share the gospel with the people that they were sent to minister to. And that is inspiring. And we should really, as you were saying, look to them as an example. Their witness is very heroic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial now.
Ooh.
And so stick with me on this one. But one of the things that jumped out to me most clearly when I was learning about this piece, was coming back to his use of this term Manitou. And I think that a huge problem with the lack of evangelization in our culture comes down to assuming that everybody who is not a Christian and either doesn't believe in or doesn't understand God is somehow demonically influenced.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking, hypothetically, let's say this indigenous tribe existed and somehow, like in the modern day, somehow still had not been contacted, hadn't heard about Christianity, and we were sending up missionaries today. Would they be told to have the patience and take the time to learn about this indigenous people's perception of God and what that was and what their God did and acted and was called, and to use that as a teaching tool, as a starting place for their evangelization? Or would they be told, cut them down at the roots? They're dealing with demons and you need to shut down any of their current belief or theology and completely replace it with everything, the teachings of Christianity. Now, this is I don't think there can be a single blanket answer in every single instance, because as we know, a lot of cultures across the world actually did have some problematic, beliefs and problematic religious practices and behaviors and things that we know to be just wrong and incorrect. And there was no skirting around that. They just needed to be stopped. But these missionaries who went over to contact this particular Canadian tribe, right? I so admire how they weren't afraid to engage in dialogue about what these people already believed. They didn't shy away from it. They didn't come in under the assumption that they were believing evil things straight from the beginning. They sat with them and they learned and they talked with them about this concept of Manitou and what that looked like, what that was, what that meant to them. And then they said, okay, you're not far off. We can work with this. And began incorporating that terminology and that language into their teaching of these people, so that it wasn't like a huge shock to their system where suddenly everything they'd ever thought was completely wrong and they had to get rid of it and replace it with something totally different that they'd never heard of. but it was like a gradual process of like, okay, you have elements of the truth in this. Let's just break this down, expand upon this. Whereas I feel like nowadays, right, we have different, issues trying to evangelize people, right? Like, for example, just as a like a modern example of something similar that we might face, a lot of people today have this mentality of like, oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious.
Yeah.
And so many people would be so quick to shut that down and say, yeah, but that's wrong. No, you don't understand what you're saying. You don't understand the importance of religion and how religion and spirituality go together. And you're probably, you're probably trying to prophesy with crystals and reading your horoscope every day, and you're letting demons into your life and into your house, and everything that you're doing is wrong and evil. How jarring would that be to somebody who might otherwise have such a genuine interest in learning about God and learning about Christianity? Find a common starting place, okay? I really would encourage you, if you're talking to somebody like this, don't come in all guns a-blazing. Sit down and say, okay, tell me about your spirituality. What does that look like for you? What do you believe in? Maybe it is crystals and horoscopes. And then you can open up a conversation around that. I mean, how many times has a crystal actually ever, literally a rock, actually ever comforted you when you were, in need or going through a hard time or whatever? There are ways of having these conversations gently and lovingly, while still holding firm to the truth and not making the other person feel like a total freak and shutting them down right away.
Yeah.
And I think we're so quick to over spiritualize some of these things as well. Not everything is demonic. And I feel like that there can be a real attitude of that among certain groups and certain people, and just in general, like in the church today, I think we've become nearly paralyzed with this fear of the demonic, where we're like, we'd almost rather be labeling something demonic only to be proven wrong than assuming that something's fine and it isn't. And I kind of get that mentality of being cautious about these things. And I'm not saying don't be discerning, of course, but I think it's important to recognize that not everything that's not Christian is demonic. There is neutral ground in there in which things can exist. And so I just would really encourage you to just be discerning about that, and to approach all of these conversations and opportunities for evangelization with an open heart and with an open mind, and with love as your primary motivation. You're not trying to come out telling these people how wrong they are about the way that they're living. You want them to feel loved and cherished and seen for who they are. And if that's the feeling that they get, that's what's going to keep them coming back. And then eventually, coming to a greater understanding of God and theology and what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. While you were, talking about this, especially at the beginning when you were talking about, if you're having a conversation with someone who is very new agey, for instance, it made me think about Jesus's example in the Gospels once again. The only times that he comes out guns a-blazing against people are of people of the Jewish faith who are already steeped, who are the most steeped in it, the Pharisees, who are so immersed in faith and yet have kind of used faith to box themselves up into little boxes, this is how you have to be or else God is going to hate you, and meanwhile, contrast that with how he treats the Samaritan woman, for instance. When he meets the Samaritan woman, she's drawing water at a well, and they just start having a conversation about water. He found a common point, and he started there. And by the end of the conversation, she was so convicted that she went preaching about him to her entire town, yeah. I think that's just really worth noting, is that, within our own, maybe there are times when being, guns a-blazing is the way to go. But when it comes to those who are not our own, that's not a good evangelization technique at all. Please avoid it at all costs.
And the thing is too, like, if you're talking about finding common ground, okay, every single person who exists, who has ever existed, desires to be loved. So that's a pretty good starting place. If you're coming in guns a-blazing, you are going to shut so many people off right away before you've even gotten a sentence out of your mouth. Whereas if you can find a loving approach to these conversations, you will be so much more effective in your evangelization. It is wild. And like no better common starting place than love,
Yeah. 100%.
And, when you look at the person of God, who he is so all encompassing of all things good and true and beautiful, that if you start looking for slivers of goodness and truth and beauty in what other people think or feel or believe or are living out, you will find tiny little slivers of God. And even just the smallest sliver is enough to go off. To begin this process of evangelization. And it really is a process. You are not going to convert in a single conversation. So yeah, I just think this song is such a beautiful example of not only the need for evangelization and ongoing evangelization in our culture, but also how to do it really well,
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was just so interesting to learn about this. I'm sure a lot of our listeners had no idea this carol even existed until you texted me about it. And we should do this for a podcast episode. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And I'm really glad that we have had this opportunity to discuss this so thoroughly.
Yeah, me too. I will link to a recording of the carol in the show notes as well, so you can all go listen to it. And it is actually genuinely one of the most beautiful Christmas carols I've ever heard. It's gorgeous. So definitely give it a listen and just ponder on all of those things as you're listening.
And speaking of listening, Tara, what are you listening to this week?
Okay. I mean, the same stuff. I spent 3 hours yesterday, sat by myself in a coffee shop studying my scores for Christmas. I got a long list of repertoire this year, and some of it's quite tough. So I really need to get it in my bones. So I'm exclusively listening still to my Christmas repertoire, but I'm going to recommend a different piece this week that's in my repertoire for this season. And it is a gospel Christmas piece.
Ooh, it is fun.
It is still choral, obviously, never getting away from choir music with me. It is a piece called Ain't That a Rockin' by Stacey Gibbs. And it is genuinely one of my favorite pieces in my repertoire this season because it is just so fun. It's so fun. It's all about, there are a lot of, I feel, gospel Christmas pieces about, then it's like the nativity, just like Mary had a baby in Bethlehem. Very simple, concepts, just like that's what happened. That's it. That's how it is. And this one's really no different. The lyrics are very simple. Mary had a baby born in Bethlehem and she rocked him in a weary land. That's 90% of the words of this song. And
love that.
But it is genuinely such a bop. It's so fun. It's been stuck in my head all week. And it's just a delightful, really upbeat, joyful listen. So that is my suggestion this week.
Love that. So fun. So fun. I can't wait to check it out.
What about you, Cecilia?
Well, since we are in Advent, I feel like I can comfortably say the Piano Guys version of O Come, O Come, Emmanuel. It is lovely. Absolutely lovely. actually, my parents and I, before I moved to Florida, we found a arrangement of it online and bought it. And we did it at church, so my mom was playing piano and I was playing flute, where the cello line would have been, for the original recording. But it's just a really lush arrangement of O Come, O Come, Emmanuel. I feel like it really, like, obviously, like, it's an instrumental arrangement, so there are no words, but I feel like the arrangement itself captures the depth of the text and conveys it wordlessly, which is very unique. I feel like that's not always the case with instrumental music. That's something that's very difficult to do. But this arrangement of O Come, Emmanuel, I feel really does that. So, and there's a hopeful quality in it as well. That's just really special. So that's what we've got going this week.
That is a great suggestion. I love that arrangement
so beautiful, isn't it?
It's great.
So beautiful.
It is great. We were actually doing quite a really difficult arrangement of O Come, Emmanuel in my group this Christmas.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, maybe I'll save that for a future week. It sounds cool when it's put together, but oh my, it is tough to get there. It's it's an interesting one. So anyway, all that being said, thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you again next week. Hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving and a great start to the Advent season, and we will talk to you later. God bless.
God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Little Sparks podcast. For more information on this podcast and our ministry, please visit www.thehildegardcollective.com.